It's Matt Williams from Brand Federation back with another one of our cold takes where we keep our eye on the news and come back to you with a short point of view on something interesting that we've read. And what we've read that's interesting recently is an article in the Wall Street Journal that documents a study from McKinsey that says that the gap between CEOs and their CMOs is wider than it's ever been, in terms of CEOs understanding what CMOs do and CEOs appreciating the difficulty of marketing. And, those gaps are just getting wider. Obviously not a great situation for chief marketing officers. So we started thinking about what could we do? What can we as marketers do to start to close that gap? And a couple of thoughts in this cold take. I want to step back and say what's really going on here. I suspect that this widening gap is really proof that the marketing world is evolving faster than most CEOs can keep up with. That's not a surprise. And it's also not the CEO's fault, right? Anybody who's been a CEO of a company knows that that person has tons of things to think about, and marketing is only a small part of it. The article quotes the CEO of Papa John's, who's a guy named Rob Lynch. I knew Rob a little bit a few years ago when we worked with him, and he was chief marketing officer of Arby's. So Rob comes at this from a slightly different point of view than most CEOs because he's been a chief marketing officer. Most CEOs don't have Rob's perspective on marketing. Most of them, as we know, are finance people or ops people. So that means that you as a chief marketing officer need to add another important to-do item to your already too long to-do list. And that is educate your CEO. So how do you do that? Well, it's a tougher job than ever because as the article states correctly, the CEO's involvement in marketing used to kind of be limited to reviewing marketing strategy and TV ads in the boardroom. And it was always the most fun part of their quarterly meeting. So while the details of marketing might not have been super familiar, the nuances and the particulars of marketing were always pretty familiar. They knew how to look at a TV ad and to think about positioning strategy and things like that. Now that the tactics have become hugely unfamiliar, think about how many CEOs have a TikTok account. The answer is probably not many, right? It means you have to educate them, not just on marketing and how it connects to the business, but what you're doing in marketing and what those tactics mean. Now, it doesn't mean you have to be in their office every week talking about TikTok, but it does mean you have to continually connect your marketing efforts, which are going to be foreign to your CEO, to the metrics that matter to them. So if you think back to a conversation Kelly and I had with Keith Middleton, who's the former CFO of one of the units of Performance Food Group, Keith made a really good point where he said CFOs don't need to understand the nuances of marketing, but they do need to know how it connects to the metrics that matter to them, and that the CFOs are sophisticated enough to understand that not all those metrics are going to connect in direct ways to things like sales and revenue growth, although we should do our best to do that. That gives us a little bit of latitude, but it doesn't take away the responsibility we have to connect what we're doing to the metrics that matter to the other members of the C-suite, especially the CEO. So helping our CEO understand what we're doing and how what we're doing connects to the metrics that matter to the business is job one. There's a caveat here. And that is, of course, that some CEOs are going to instinctively get the role of marketing and how it contributes to their business. Look at guys like Rob Lynch. Rob gets what we do. He understands how that works. Unfortunately, there are some companies and some CEOs whose decades of success have had nothing to do with marketing, and they're just not going to ever get what we're about. That hasn't changed. That's always been true. But that gap between the CMO and what we do and that CEO who might not quite get it has probably widened because what we do as marketers has changed so dramatically. So if they didn't get it before, they're really not going to get it now. What I would suggest is if you find yourself working for one of those companies, you have to think or acknowledge that you may be in a company whose senior leadership is really never going to quite understand or even appreciate what you do. And at that point, you have to think hard about how you want to spend your career. You may want to stay there, but you may want to think about going to a place that has a closer or maybe greater appreciation for what we do. Let me boil this thing down to the bottom line. Every C-level executive has the responsibility to educate his or her CEO about what they do. Every day, that's our job. In the marketer's case, that job has gotten tougher, not easier, because the marketing environment has changed so dramatically and has become even more unfamiliar to the CEO that you need to educate. So you have a CEO who's probably not a marketer, but they need to understand the power of marketing to contribute to that organization. There are two things you should do to prove that power. Number one is connect, and number two is educate. Connect the metrics that matter to the work that you're doing every day. Even if those metrics aren't directly connected in a one-to-one way, if there's a secondary or a tertiary connection, make the connection for your CEO and draw their attention to that connection. The second thing is education. Look for opportunities to educate your CEO about how the marketing environment is changing. If you have a CEO who's interested in what we do and acknowledges that marketing is an important driver of the success of the business, they will want to know that and they'll engage in that conversation. Long story short, yes, the gap is real. Yes, the gap is widening. There are good reasons for the widening of the gap between the CEO and the CMO, but there are important things that we can do to fix that gap. Connect what you do to the business and continually educate your CEO colleagues about how our business is changing and how marketing contributes to the company.